Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. Today, close your eyes and imagine that you're standing at an airport, boarding pass in hand, and you have a choice to make. You can head to your gate, follow your itinerary, check the must-see sites, and then return home with some great photos, good memories. Or you can throw away the guidebook, embrace the unexpected, and return as a fundamentally different person than the one who left. Well, welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, where we don't just talk to writers, we explore the transformational journeys that create them. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, and today we're diving into that choice with Craig Storti, whose latest book, Why Travel Matters, challenges everything we knew about the difference between being a tourist and being a traveler. You might remember Craig from our first conversation, where we explored his groundbreaking work in intercultural communication, from training fire departments to save lives through better cultural understanding, to helping global business teams collaborate across continents. But today we're venturing into a little bit of a different territory, exploring how the simple act of stepping outside our familiar world can completely reshape who we are. Craig has spent over 3 decades not just visiting the world, but allowing it to transform him. And in Why Travel Matters, he's distilled that wisdom into a guide for anyone brave enough to choose growth over comfort. So get ready, because we're going to have an amazing conversation today. Craig, welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast for your second time.
You, Danielle, it's a pleasure to be back. I look forward to talking about this topic with you.
Yeah, me too. I mean, as somebody who's also traveled a bunch, this is something that I find really exciting. I understand your message, and I think we're going to have a lot to chat about today. So yeah, welcome. And just to get started a little bit, to remind the audience, on our first podcast together, we talked about your Peace Corps experience in Morocco and how that kind of shaped your career. But in Why Travel Matters, you distinguish between tourists and travelers. So I'm wondering, did that first experience in the Peace Corps shape that perspective for you in any way?
It did, actually, in a big way, in the sense that I was very young. I'd never left America. Well, I'd been to Canada. And I went to Morocco. And I knew that this experience was changing me. And I especially realized that when I came home afterwards. And I thought, how did that happen? What does encountering difference, if you will, living in an unfamiliar culture, what does it do to the individual? How does it make that person who comes back a changed individual from the person that left? And I wondered, there must be books about this, but for a while I was kind of distracted with work, etc. And so I didn't know, I didn't do much reading. And then I thought, there are lots of travel books. These are people who, but for many generations, have gone to other countries and described the experience. And I thought maybe in those travel books, there's some insights that can help explain what happened to me by living for 2 years in a completely foreign country. So I started reading travel books, Danielle, and that's what got me interested in what eventually became the book, Why Travel Matters. And it also helped me in my profession as an intercultural trainer, because of course travel books are about cross-cultural encounters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that this experience did shape you. I think a lot of authors are shaped by their experiences, but this one, of course, is a very unique one. But that wasn't your only travel experience. You also went to Nepal for years. You traveled extensively for 3 decades after that. So I'm wondering, was there a specific moment when travel fundamentally changed you, who you are as a person?
Well, I think it was a slow process. Certainly those 2 years in Morocco in 1970 to 72 had probably the biggest impact, though I did subsequently live for 2 years in Nepal. And as you said, I also spent a lengthy period, several months, in Tunisia, Sri Lanka, and then Nepal, and also Morocco. And so together, those experiences all shaped me. But I would say the one where I was 2 years living in a Moroccan village probably shaped me the most. But by the time I started traveling in Asia, I had started reading travel books as I told you, and at the same time I was doing work as a Peace Corps contractor, directing 3-month training programs again in Morocco, Tunisia, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. And I had a high school teacher who every day, my 12th grade high school teacher, every day she put a quote of the day on the blackboard in our room. And I thought that was so cool. And when I became director of these Peace Corps training programs that lasted for about 3 months, I thought, I want a quote of the day about the experience of encountering another culture. And I'd been reading all these travel books and collecting quotes. And so then I started collecting them quite seriously. And by the time I started working on Why Travel Matters, I actually had over 500 quotations where famous and not so famous travel writers described how the experience of being in a foreign environment changed them. And so that was kind of the raw material from which I started thinking about the book.
One of the most powerful quotes in your book that I found very moving was one by Somerset Maugham saying, I do not bring back from a journey quite the same self that I took. So, you have a lot of quotes just like that that really helped to shape the book itself. So I'm wondering, do you relate to that quote in particular over others, and why choose that? Why did you pick these particular quotes?
Yeah, that Somerset Maugham quote, which is I come back a different person. That prompted me because many writers have said that in one form or another, and I
Right.
quote other writers in the book that say that. But I started thinking, what is the process? What is the actual mechanism by which that happens? I agree. I think everybody agrees. You don't come back from a journey overseas the same person who left, but what is it that happens and what changes take place so that you're not the same person? So the Somerset Maugham quote is kind of the foundation quote of the book. And the book is really about the mechanisms, as specific as one can be about something that's completely sort of mental, emotional, psychological. What are the mechanisms by which travel changes the individual? I hadn't seen that anywhere. And actually, in reading your list of questions that you sent me before the interview, one of the differences in this book, Danielle, from all the other books that I've written is that I pretty much knew what I was going to say when I wrote those other books.
Ah.
I had specific things that I wanted to describe or to explain. And it was just a process of explaining things I already understood. But actually, when I started Why Travel Matters, I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to explain the process by which travel changes people, but I really wasn't sure how that happened. And so I remember taking long walks, especially when I was writing the last part of the book, where I explained the effect of actually how people who see the world very different from you, the effect that has on you. I took long walks because I couldn't figure it out exactly what I wanted to say there. And it was the kind of climax of the book, so I knew it had to be really good. But I never struggled that way with my other books, but with this one I was figuring it out as I went along. And a lot of rewriting because of that. I'd start a whole series of paragraphs and it just wouldn't work. And so then I'd have to drop it, maybe leave it for a couple days, not think about it, and then try again. That was quite new for me.
Right. So would you say those long walks were successful in helping you figure out what exactly you wanted to say, or were there any other methods that you employed while doing so? I mean, perhaps maybe like reading other books or doing research, or did that also spark your inspiration?
Well, I didn't have to do research. What helped me in writing that book is my career in intercultural communications, helping people from one culture understand, work effectively with people from other cultures. Because many of the core concepts, the foundation paradigms in that field, of course, apply to any kind of encounter with somebody from another culture. And so I went into it with a foundation of concepts that I could apply to this new topic, which was travel, not intercultural communications. And so that helped me. But again, I had to get beyond that because I was trying to describe something more profound. In my other intercultural books, I help people understand cultural differences. The point of this book was to help people understand the impact of experiencing those differences on personal growth.
Understood, right. And I can see how that's a little bit different, but it's both still grounded in your own experiences and what you've learned from your time in the Peace Corps. So definitely interesting to think about. And to all the authors out there listening today, that's something to think about too. When you write what you know, ideas you might have trouble figuring out which ideas to share, but at the end of the day, you do have it right here in your head. So that makes
Yes,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
So, transitioning a little bit into more of the writing process, then, on our first podcast, we discussed how you write for about 2 to 3 hours maximum before quality starts to diminish. You give yourself those breaks. But Why Travel Matters seems a little bit more philosophical than your practical communication goals. So, did you use a different writing process for this book than the others, or was it basically the same?
Well, it was basically the same, except that, as you mentioned in one of your questions, there's a lot of philosophy in this book,
Right.
and not just description, but actually analysis of how the mind works, actually, and how people think and how their thinking can change. So the process was the same, except that I would say the product in 2 or 3 hours was usually less than the product of 2 or 3 hours of my other books, just
Uh,
because what I was working with was more abstract. And when you're writing specifics, you can write more quickly. When you're really writing about thoughts and trying to put thoughts together in a coherent fashion, it just takes longer. And so I would say my product was less in the same time period writing this book, because what I was grappling with was harder to pin down.
Understood, right. It takes a lot more thought, which is what you mentioned before about going on those walks and so on and so forth. So I
And
understand
so
that.
found I do find as a writer that if I can step away, like as I say, I write maybe 2, 3 hours in the morning. If I can step away for at least that long, if not longer, then I find that I can actually start again. But if I don't step away, as I mentioned earlier, the writing is not very inspired, and I can keep writing, I can keep explaining things, but the language isn't good, and I know I'll have to go over it again. Whereas if I step away when it's still coming out well, then I don't exhaust myself, and I can go back to it maybe 4 or 5 hours later and work for another hour or two. But that break is really essential, not just for quality, though mainly, but also so that I can come back with some fresh thinking.
Understood. Yeah, it's very important that we take those breaks because it allows our mind time to reset, to think of something else, to generate more ideas, and to synthesize what we've already written also. So all of that does come into play. Transferring a little bit more to some other topics about this writing process. One important thing that you did talk about on our previous one is the importance of making complex concepts accessible. So I do know that this next book's all about philosophy, like you mentioned before. I'm wondering if you had to struggle a little bit with taking these concepts and making them accessible, because they're such profound themes, of course. So was there any challenge in doing that to making it accessible?
Well, what made it two things I think make books accessible to the reader. One is just language. Keep the language lay language, not technical language, unless you're writing for a technical audience. And the other thing is to use illustrations whenever you can, because even the most profound philosophical ideas, they can be illustrated through real examples. And when you're writing real examples, you engage the reader because they like to hear that I went here and I did that. So in the Why Travel Matters, I have whenever I get to a new sort of abstract concept or go into a new topic, I always include an illustration of how what I'm talking about actually happens. And then readers get, they're not just reading my thoughts for page after page. They're also reading incidents, either my own stories or stories from other writers, which bring the concepts to life. And you can't just write concepts for very long and not lose the reader, even the most interested reader. They like to be brought back to reality. And how does what I'm reading, how does it affect me, the reader? And so stories are the way to bring that back. I think in any book, but especially in books that are maybe slightly abstract or about concepts, not just topics.
Understood. Yeah, and I like what you said about the visuals there too. What was your process for creating those? Did you draw the figures yourself, or did you go out and outsource people who can make these diagrams and sketches?
Oh, well, the charts I made myself. The people who published the book had some very nice old maps that they used on the initial page of every chapter. But
Okay.
other than that, the only other graphics were the charts, and I did create those from my background in intercultural communication.
Understood, right. So what writers can learn from that then is that you can take a hand and do it yourself and use your own knowledge, or of course, there's always publishers who can help you lend a guiding hand. So that's great. So transferring a little bit back into the book itself, I think one important thing, and one of the main themes of this book that we did mention before, is that there's a difference between traveling as being recreational. Sorry, tourism, as you define it, is recreational, while travel is primarily educational. So I'm wondering, what does somebody need to do to shift from a tourist mindset to a traveler mindset? I'm wondering if there's any specific strategies that they might use.
Well, actually, I think it's the last chapter of the book, I have 10 tips. If you really want to be a traveler, which is to say to engage the culture and be changed by it, then you need to travel in a certain way. I don't mean to demean tourism in the book, but tourism, as you said, and as I say in the book, is primarily recreational. It's getting away from. Whereas travel is primarily, the way I define it in the book, is primarily educational and it's engaging in. So I give some tips to people. If you want to be changed by the experience, then a few practical things you can do to increase your chances, at least, of encountering the culture, which is what will change you. So one of my tips, it's controversial in the travel field, but one of my tips is to travel alone. The main reason being that if you travel alone, there's nobody standing between you and the other culture. If you travel with somebody, and there's nothing wrong with that, and you can certainly have an incredibly rich experience traveling with another person. But a person sitting next to you on the train is from your culture. The person eating with you in the restaurant at night is from your culture. And when you place somebody between yourself and the local culture, for one thing, the locals aren't going to reach out to you. If you're sitting next to your friend, if there's an empty seat next to you on the train, a very good chance somebody from the local culture will take that seat, and you can begin to engage in the other culture. Nothing wrong with traveling with another person, but it does complicate things. A couple other things I've mentioned as tips are to walk wherever you can. When you're in a moving vehicle, by definition, you're passing by the culture very quickly. You're not being sort of hit by the culture. When you walk down the street or down into the market, you're surrounded by the culture. You can stop anytime. The impact is really strong. In a moving vehicle, you're still seeing the sights. You're still even perhaps sitting next to somebody from the local culture, but the culture goes by really fast. The slower the culture goes by, the more you can be impacted by it. And I've also said to linger. Don't spend 5 minutes in a place. Spend an hour in the place. See what happens, what changes during that hour, and don't be in a hurry. The less you're in a hurry, the more you're going to see. Go off the grid.
Mm,
Don't be on cell phone while you're trying to, interact with a local, or you're trying to view a scene. You can't be in two places at once. You can either be on your cell phone or on your laptop communicating with the people back home, or you can be disconnected and completely at the mercy of the culture. So try to go off the grid. I mean, you can write something at night if you like, but don't travel with your cell phone turned on. Travel with it turned off. And then whatever happens is going to happen because of the culture and not because of it. And you're in the mood to soak it up.
Yeah, I love all of these tips. I think that they're all very useful and insightful ways to immerse yourself in the culture, and you make a lot of sense too, especially with traveling with somebody else. I traveled the world, and I did so with my boyfriend. So we, did of course share our meals together. So never gave a lot of people opportunity to come up to us. That being said, we did make a lot of friends because, of course, we, turn to the table next to us, begin chatting, or, that thing. So you kind of have to make a little bit of an extra effort, but one way or another, you do still kind of get immersed in whatever is going on. So it's always cool to make new friends and see the different areas. But definitely that. And the cell phone thing is huge too. If you're just scrolling the, Instagram, that's the same Instagram you're seeing back home. It's not, whatever is going on around you when you're over in Asia or wherever it might be. So amazing stuff there, Craig. Thank you for that.
And
So
one advantage I might mention about traveling with somebody else is that, some people are better are more they're more extroverted than other people. And if you're an introvert and you travel with an extrovert,
yes.
then you can have a richer experience because that person is comfortable reaching out, and it's a real benefit that you might not experience if you traveled alone and were more introverted.
That is an amazing tip too. Yeah, if you're feeling shy and you maybe don't know the language as well, then it's definitely a good tip to have somebody who's an extrovert. So,
Yeah,
this is all
yeah.
amazing stuff. I appreciate it. So Craig, you do have a couple other books out there on the list here. I'm wondering, one, are you working on any current projects right now? Any other books kind of in your rapport right now that you've been dabbling in?
Well, more than dabbling, I'm just actually working on the epilogue to my new book about Mount Everest. As you might
Oh,
remember,
good.
I have a previous book called The Hunt for Mount Everest, which deals with the first expedition in 1921. But since that book came out, I've started another book called Our Mountain, which is about the 100 years that the British dominated Mount Everest from its discovery in 1853 until it was finally climbed by the British in 1953. And I've actually been working on that book for more than a couple of years. So it's a 100-year history. And your readers, your writers, writing audience might be interested. One of the challenges I knew I was going to face when I wrote this book is that in that period it covers 9 expeditions to the same mountain. And I thought, how am I going to keep up interest? How am I going to write this in such a way that here we are with expedition number 6, sounds a lot like 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, but the readers are going to begin to lose interest. And so one of the challenges I expected, but actually for some reason, maybe I can explain it, didn't happen so much, was how to keep the pace up when basically you're describing 9 iterations of the same thing. Of course, they weren't the same thing. They were always with different people. And each one built upon the previous one. And I just found that having a lot of material available to use, that I could include new things in each chapter, of course, new characters. And it does actually build, which is what I wanted it to do. But I was worried that 9 chapters about the same thing might not build. And of course, if a book doesn't build, you lose the readers because the interest isn't there. And so the way I sort of solved that problem was to emphasize the really interesting characters that were very different from each other in each expedition. And then there's also a theme that goes throughout how the British throughout that really between 1921 and 1953, how they managed to keep climbers from every other country away from Mount Everest and some of the
Right.
challenges they faced. So it does build in that way, but I was worried that how am I going to keep it moving?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that everybody needs to think about is the pacing of your book. You don't want your book to drag for too long or to be too speedy either. You need to find the right balance to see exactly what the readers, want to understand and what to spend more time on. So, that's a really good tip right there, finding the right balance, the pace.
Yeah, every book has to build. Even books that aren't about journeys or even about expeditions, even very thoughtful philosophical books have to build from one scene to the next, and or you lose interest. The reader loses interest.
Definitely. So all this being said, if people have been inspired by what you have to say today and they want to learn a little bit more, get in touch with you, stay up to date with the new book coming out, and also, of course, pick up their own copies, where is the best location for them to get connected? Do you have a certain website for everyone to check out?
CraigStorti.com is my website, and there's a page on every one of my books. All of my books are available on Amazon, of course, and through other websites. If you want to write to me personally, you can do that from my website. There's a link to me, or you can just write me Craig@CraigStorti.com, and then I'm happy to hear from readers. And I just recently got an email from a man who was on the street in London on June 2nd, 1953, when Queen Elizabeth was crowned. And my book, The Hunt for Mount Everest, ends with the story of how the embedded journalist James Morris got the story back to England, because
Oh,
the
wow.
Mount Everest only happened 2 days earlier, how he got the story back to England. And then it was broadcast over the loudspeakers to all the people waiting on the coronation route. They learned by these speakers that the Everest had been climbed. And I got an email from a man who was there that morning and said he heard that over the loudspeaker. So I love getting
That's
emails like that.
incredible. Wow. You should even get in touch with him and see what his side of the story was. Maybe that'd be a fun little anecdote to add into another version of the book or something. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
I
You always love
love
making
it.
those connections.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite fun.
Yeah, and I guess to all the listeners here, that's another thing that you can learn. You never know who's going to reach out and what more you can learn and what connections you might make after your book has been launched. So that's all the importance of staying accessible to your readers and building that audience.
That's right. That's
Um,
right.
So, Craig, it's been a beautiful, wonderful conversation today. We've talked a lot about the distinction between tourists and travelers, about writing tips also. I'm wondering if you happen to have any other tips for the audience today, any words of wisdom to leave them with as we begin to wrap up.
Well, I'd like to actually close with the kind of the real theme of my book, which is that travel changes people. We know that, and the book describes how. And people who change can grow. And one of the last lines of one of my chapters is that people who can grow are humanity's best hope. And I
Mm.
think that if you see that you can change, then you can grow. And if you can grow, then intolerance drops away, ethnocentrism drops away, and one person being able to grow makes the world a better place. And travel teaches you that you can change and you can grow.
Understood. Perfect. No, I love that. And I think that's something we should all be keeping in mind too. You can grow with change. It's what you have to do. So yeah, thank you again for coming on. It's been a pleasure seeing you again and getting to know a little bit more about your other books. I think it's always very insightful and inspiring to hear your stories because it's stuff that everybody wants to experience for themselves, and you offer a fresh new take on it. So it's beautiful stuff there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle. It's my pleasure.
Of course, yeah. And to all of our listeners and aspiring authors, Craig's journey shows us that sometimes our most powerful work comes not from what we know, but who we become through embracing the unknown. His books share information, but also help us through transformation too. So, whether you're planning your next trip, building cross-cultural bridges in your work, or simply wondering how to grow as a person, Craig has shown us that the choice is always ours. We can stay comfortable, or we can step into our out of the comfort zone, become the person we're meant to become. So, Be sure to check out the book, check out the links of Craig's. We're going to put that in the description box of the podcast today, so you can go ahead and click on over. And until next time, just keep writing, keep growing, and keep choosing the path that transforms you. Thank you so much for choosing us on Authors on Mission podcast.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.